Christ is in our midst.
He is in our assembly.
Good morning. I don't know if any of you tried this when you were kids, but using lemon juice as invisible ink. Have you ever done that? Turns out if you take a little lemon juice, you mix it in a little water, and then you get a Q-tip or something like that, and you dip it in, and you can write something on a piece of paper, but you can't see it. But if you hold that piece of paper up to a light bulb, probably not an LED light bulb because there's no heat coming off of that, but from some incandescent bulb, the letters that you wrote will come out. So as kids, that's a fun way to send secret messages. Well, on January 6th in 1995, and this is, by the way, a true story, 2 men robbed 2 Greater Pittsburgh banks at gunpoint without any attempt to disguise themselves. Instead, they had covered their faces with lemon juice, believing that it would make them invisible to the cameras and to people around them. One of them was arrested a few days later, while the other was apprehended after that, after being identified in surveillance photographs. When shown the photographs in which he had been identified, he was shocked and exclaimed, "But I wore the lemon juice. I wore the lemon juice." This is a good example of ignorance, not knowing the truth, not knowing something that is truth. Well, in the gospel today, we hear this parable that the Lord told about the rich man and Lazarus. And in the story, as Lazarus is now in Abraham's bosom and the rich man is suffering in Hades, the rich man says, he pleads ignorance. I really didn't know how this whole thing worked. He even says, "Have Lazarus come and give me some water." He's not asking for forgiveness or having a change of heart. Then he says, "Tell my brothers so that they don't make the same mistake that I made." I mean, I made this mistake. I just didn't know. But we know from the story that it wasn't ignorance, but it was a choice that this man chose to ignore Lazarus. Now, there are some things in life that we should ignore. Ignoring isn't necessarily a bad thing. We should ignore when people are judgmental to us. We should ignore when people praise us too much. There's a story from the Desert Fathers. Abba Makarios is met by one of his disciples, and his disciple said to him, "Abba, give me a word." He said, "Go into the cemetery tonight and praise all the people at the cemetery." So he goes and he praises them. He says how wonderful they are, all the people dead and buried at the cemetery. And he comes back the next morning and Abba says to him, "So, what did they say?" He said, "They said nothing, Abba." He says, "Well, go again tonight and really say some mean things to them. Really tell them how bad they are." So that night, being obedient, he goes to the cemetery and he tells all the people who are dead and buried. He tells them what rotten people they are and how they didn't follow God's plan and rules and guidance in their life, how they did their own thing and went their own way. And he comes back the next day and Abba says to him, "So, did you do what I asked you?" He says, "Yes, I did," because he was obedient. And he says, well, what did they say the first night when you praised them? He said, "They said nothing, Abba." "Well, what about the next day when you cursed them?" "Abba, they're dead. They didn't say anything." Well, that's how you should be to the blessings or curses of other people to you. Don't pay any attention to them. Focus on what God thinks of you. So that's a couple things that we could ignore when people are judgmental to us, when people praise us. Or old troubles or wrongs from the past. Sometimes we focus on them. We just can't let them go. Old resentments. Or little negatives that happen every day. You know, lots of little things happen every day that really bother us, that really get us distracted. We focus on it. If I asked any of you, what are some of the negative things that happened already to you this day, today? You could probably give me a few. But it's better to ignore these things because they're going to happen anyway, and focus on and look for the blessings that come across us. Another thing we should ignore, I think, is the necessary pain and work of going through some difficulty, through some challenge. If we have to go through it, especially if it's good for us, so many good things that we want and do take hard work and have times, points within it that are difficult. If we focus on the difficulty, focus on the hard part of it, without looking at the goal of it, it can bog us down. We can even stop doing the good thing that we're striving to do. So sometimes we have to ignore those things. We have to ignore things that are out of our control. There's that beautiful prayer that oftentimes called the Serenity Prayer that those in Alcoholics Anonymous kind of took and used as one of their prayers. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There are some things that are out of our control. We can't change them. So let's move on from that. Thoughts that are really a form of distraction, they keep us from focusing on what's important. St. Paisios said we have these thoughts sometimes that we should ignore. They're distractions. They come during prayer time. They come at other times, just strange thoughts sometimes that aren't really what we believe or what we think. These thoughts come in. Sometimes we feel so guilty about them. Sometimes we bring them into confession. St. Paisios says, ignore them. They're like airplanes flying through. When we start thinking of them, we give them an airport to land. But if we ignore them, we don't give them any place to land and cause greater distraction. But in this story, the rich man is not ignoring, he's not ignorant, he's not ignoring these things that we should ignore, but he's ignoring Lazarus. And really, in a way, he's not only ignoring poor Lazarus, but he's ignoring the pathway or the gate that God has given him to come closer to himself. This is from our passage today, Luke chapter 16, verse 19. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores. So if you can picture this, there's the rich man, there's Lazarus, and there's this gate between them. Now, gates are very important in the scriptures. They're important in physical ways. Even today in the Middle East, many towns were surrounded by tall walls, and the gates were the only places that were permeable. The gates were the place where someone could come in and someone could go out. Gates are points of entrance, where entrance is either denied or gained. We use the phrase, the word gate, oftentimes in the church, in many places, in metaphors regarding the Theotokos. We have the royal gates, which offer this connection from heaven and to earth. We believe that Christ has opened the gates of paradise for us. And we believe that Christ has crushed the gates of hell, crushed the gates of more than simply part of the story that there's a gate there. But Lazarus is at the gate. Lazarus is this man's gate. Lazarus is what is keeping him from heaven, or what is allowing him to enter heaven. In fact, the word Lazarus means God helps. If you look through the Bible and look through all the parables of Jesus, all the parables of Jesus, and you know that all the parables of Jesus, and you know that he spoke often, he taught often in parables. In all the parables, he never uses the name of characters in the parable. He might say, one person was doing this, or two people went out to pray, or a sower was sowing his field, but he never says the name except for this one exception. He uses this name Lazarus in a parable. So perhaps there's something more than he just happened to say this one name, but there's something in the name. And the name means God helps. So you could look at it as, here's the rich man, and at his gate is God helps. God helps is at the gate. Yet the rich man does not want to open the gate. The rich man does not want to access God's help. For the rich man, Lazarus was God's help, and he refused God's help. We read in 16:26, when the rich man is asking Abraham for help, Abraham says to him, "And beside all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us." In his life, the gate was open. In his life, the gate was accessible. But at this point, the gate has been closed, and a great chasm has been fixed, that none may cross over. The time for crossing over is in this life. It's not later on. The time is now. It's too late for the rich man in this story, but it's not too late for us. which is why Jesus is telling the story. Gates are opportunities. They are places that they are things that God gives to us in our life. They are opportunities to come closer to Him. Jesus wants us to see that the rich man wasn't simply ignorant, but he was choosing to ignore the gate that was right there, that he refused to open it. Not only is it a good thing to do good, to help other people, to be compassionate to the poor. Not only is it a right thing to do, and we should do it because it's the right thing, which we should, but beside all this, it is our gate into the kingdom. And it's not the first time the scriptures talk about compassion and love towards the poor being a gate. We hear that throughout the scriptures. And I want to read this passage from Isaiah chapter 58, starting in verse 3. Isaiah is speaking in a prophetic way, and he first speaks in the words of the people, and then he answers with God's answer. This is what the people say. Why have we fasted and you don't see it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? And this is the answer that God gives. Behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard, and you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. This is what the scriptures say. This is what they've been saying all along. Jesus is not saying something new here about what is expected of us. I think this is true that those in need are a gate for us as well. And there may be other gates that we personally have that might be different. may have certain gates, and you may have certain gates that the Lord is using in your life to help you come closer to Him. What are the gates in your life? It's good to think about this. What are the things in your life that God is using to bring you closer to Him? And what are you doing about those gates? Are you choosing to ignore the gate? Are you not opening the gate, not letting that gate be open? Walking by the gate, not looking at the gate? Or are we taking advantage and seeing that gate, as difficult as it might be, seeing it as an opportunity, a way that God is drawing us to Himself, a way that God is allowing us to come into contact with Him? It's important not only to recognize the gate, but not to ignore it, to access it, and to touch God by it. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.